Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, it's with great excitement and relief that I rise to speak on the introduction of the Housing Australia Future Fund Bill 2023 and the bill to create the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, because these bills will start the process for the largest boost to affordable and social housing we have seen in more than a decade. Make no mistake, the outcomes from these bills will ultimately fundamentally change people's lives for the better. Deputy Speaker, to say we have a housing crisis on the New South Wales South Coast is putting it mildly. We are no stranger to disasters, but the housing crisis on the New South Wales South Coast is our new disaster. Over many years, the previous coalition government did nothing to even begin to address this growing housing crisis. The housing crisis may have been once the silent crisis, but particularly impacting our most disadvantaged. But over many years of inaction of the previous government, it has now grown to epic proportions. As the federal member, myself and my office are inundated regularly with cries for help. It is heartbreaking to hear these stories of struggle from everyday people in our community. I help where I can, but it isn't easy when there is no stock, when prices are out of control and community housing is overwhelmed. Our local housing and homelessness providers are doing everything possible to support people, but the reality is there just isn't enough affordable and social housing. Our local councils have also stepped up, trying to do their bit to ease pressures. Our community organisations, churches, businesses, individuals, unions and more have also stepped up, that true South Coast spirit that I'm always singing about. But what was lacking was leadership at the federal level. Everyone could blatantly see there needed to be a solution, but it just wasn't there under the previous coalition government. Gilmore on the New South Wales South Coast, which encompasses the Kiama local government area in the north, the Shoalhaven and to Batemans Bay, Moruya and Churros Head areas in the Eurobodalla Shire, has had a hammering, particularly over the last 4 years. There's been drought, the Black Summer bushfires, multiple storms, floods, landslides, roads cut, COVID, and a variety of these disasters at the same time. It really has been the unthinkable, perfect, horrible storm, and difficult to comprehend the immense toll this has taken on people. But what has been left, without a doubt, is the housing disaster. If it wasn't bad enough that hundreds of people lost their homes and had damaged homes from the bushfires, so began the task of finding somewhere to live. This isn't so easy when you're living on the coast and there is great demand for holiday rentals. When people found temporary housing, there were heartbreaking stories of people, and with young children, having to move multiple times in a short space of time to move out because the house was to be rented out in the holiday time. With COVID, the South Coast was seen as a haven, as more holiday homeowners chose to relocate to the coast. Who could blame them? At the same time, property prices and rents were spiralling upwards, and many property owners took that opportunity to sell to realise the gain. Those two actions led to devastating consequences locally. One, it shrunk the private housing stock, so if you were, say, a pensioner that had rented and lived in the same property for 15 years, all of a sudden you had no home. And faced with soaring rents and just no homes available, it was the fastest way to become homeless. One day you had a home, the next you didn't. It didn't discriminate. It didn't matter if you were a pensioner, a family with young kids, have a disability, a frontline worker, or even with two incomes. And two, it shrunk the stock of social housing as more landlords sold properties. So our community housing providers had less homes available. So where do people go? Our homelessness providers have been facing this battle each and every day. It's really one vicious cycle. Everyone knows the problem. There just isn't enough affordable and social housing. Deputy Speaker, there are many local harrowing stories. As harrowing as they are, it is important that the House understands the gravity of the situation. Take the single mum of four from Warragee. She's a hairdresser who works part-time while she tries to take care of her kids and get by. She was ahead on her rent in a private community housing supported home. She'd paid the bond and was doing everything right, but the house was riddled with mould, an ongoing issue that she couldn't resolve and was making her 2-year-old child sick. She did what any mother would do. She put the health of her child first. She asked Southern Cross Community Housing for a transfer, but she can't get one. She's asked them for her bond back and for some of the rent that she has overpaid to help her financially, but she can't get that either. So she and her 4 kids have been forced to couch surf for the last year. Another example of the shambles of the Liberals and Nationals have left our community housing become. The New South Wales Government has said, be sick or be homeless, and don't expect us to give you your money back. This family has been on a priority housing list for a year, but there is no information on when they can expect a new home. I'd like to say this is a special case, an isolated incident, but I'm sorry to say it isn't. Deputy Speaker, the Moruya North Head campground is home to around 50 people with nowhere to go. The campground is their home. There is no alternative accommodation. While local homelessness support services, council and the community do all they can to provide support, provide access to networks and food and essential items, the fact that there is no alternative accommodation is one of the biggest blights on society I have seen. Council has continued to call on the New South Wales Government to do something to help these people, but those calls are falling on deaf ears. The campground is not meant for people to live there. There is no permanent hot water, there are no enclosed showers, but with no other sources of temporary accommodation and nowhere else for these people to go, what choice is there? While this bill does not offer an immediate solution, it does start today to correct the immense wrongs and begin the long road back to fixing the huge supply issue there is and to build more affordable and social housing. Deputy Speaker, Salt Ministries and their wonderful volunteers have been providing community meals and outreach support for the homeless for years. But the demand for somewhere to live for so many people grew and grew. Salt opened Safe Shelter Shoalhaven without the help of government funds and has been operating locally for the last 5 years. In that time, they have provided a safe place to sleep for over 850 families and individuals. But without government support, the service has twice been on the verge of closure. I first raised this with the New South Wales Minister in October last year, and in December I stood with local Labor candidates Caitlin McInerney and Liza Butler to announce that the Minns government would support Safe Shelter Shoalhaven with a $250,000 to keep their doors open. But after months of the government knowing the dire situation the shelter was in, the Liberals waited until the 11th hour, the day the shelter was to close, before stepping in with a short reprieve until June. Just far enough to get it out of an election cycle. Salt does more than just run this shelter. The Salt store delivers free food, clothing and furniture to more than 1,100 families weekly. Realising what a gap the New South Wales Government had left in emergency and temporary housing, Salt began actively seeking out private rentals and managing them to provide housing for the homeless. Their Salt Assisted Housing program has over 35 long-term homes which they sublet to people in need. They want to do more, but they need more support, because on their own they simply cannot provide enough support for our homeless. Such is the demand and the lack of affordable housing. Deputy Speaker, the housing crisis affects everyone. The worker shortage on the South Coast is dire, but one of the main issues is that even if people want to move here to take up work, they most often cannot find housing. I have heard story after story of people not taking up jobs because of this. I have heard the extraordinary lengths employers will go to secure housing for prospective staff members to entice them to move to the coast for work. We have many exciting projects happening on the coast, many road and community infrastructure projects, a new hospital at Moruya, an upgraded Shoalhaven Hospital at Nowra. But with the hospitals, where will the hundreds and hundreds of additional frontline workers live? As the federal member for Gilmore, I have been raising the dire housing situation on the South Coast for years. First with the then Shadow Minister for Housing and Homelessness, Jason Clare, and the now Minister for Housing, Julie Collins. There have been many visits visits to the South Coast to meet with homelessness providers. You only have to visit to get an understanding of the immense problem. I tried the former ministers as well, but no surprises that nothing came from it. That's why in the lead up to the 2022 federal election, I was delighted and relieved to see Labor's commitments around affordable and social housing. And today, a proud member of the Albanese Labor government, I am so happy to be speaking on these bills because I know that these bills in time will lead to intergenerational reform, change lives and create a better future for everyone. But today also has a bitter taste, because apparently it wasn't enough that the former Liberal National Government took no action to address our housing crisis. Apparently it wasn't enough that at a state level the Liberals and Nationals have left community housing and homelessness services in shambles with funding cuts and neglect. No, today the Liberals and Nationals have decided they want to inflict even more damage, and worst of all, with the help of the Greens Party. They are fighting against the millions of people this bill will help. People like the young mum in Warragee and the dozens of others contacting my office every week, or the 50 people in Moruya living in a campground with nowhere else to go. They are fighting against people fleeing domestic violence, our veterans, First Nations people, so many people around the country who need a home. It is absolutely appalling, and every member of the Liberals, the Nationals and the Greens should be ashamed, because clearly Labor is the only party who is willing to do every single thing we can to address the housing crisis with the biggest investments we have ever seen. Deputy Speaker, the Housing Australia Future Bill 2023 will establish the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund with annual disbursements used to fund social and affordable housing and other acute housing needs. It will provide a source of funding to support and increase social and affordable housing, as well as fund other acute housing needs for remote Indigenous communities, women, children and veterans. The Housing Council Bill establishes the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council as an independent statutory advisory body. The Council will inform the Commonwealth's approach to housing policy by delivering independent advice to the government on housing supply and affordability. I am particularly pleased that the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council will play a leadership role in bringing all levels of government together to work through the myriad of issues and to get that boost in affordable and social housing happening where it's needed most. The amendment bill facilitates the transition of the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation to Housing Australia, extends the Commonwealth Guarantee of Housing Australia's liabilities, and expands its activities to manage delivery of social and affordable housing under the Housing Australia Future Fund. Extending the Commonwealth Guarantee recognises the importance of the Affordable Housing Bond Aggregator and Housing Australia's role in continuing to offer community housing providers low-cost and longer-term finance. Deputy Speaker, so many local organisations, our councils, community housing, our homeless provider network, homelessness task force, have good solutions, but it needs leadership from the federal government. For the first time, the National Housing Affordability and Supply Council will be the vehicle for that leadership to drive home policy and reforms to assist the biggest boost in affordable and social housing. I would like to sincerely thank every person that has contacted me with their own housing story. The strength they showed just to ask for help has given me strength to battle on with this enormous change so that it might help the thousands of local people that need help. To everyone working and volunteering in the affordable and social housing space and supporting our homeless, you are the brave ones too. You have never given up despite atrocious circumstances. The Albanese government will never stop trying to do what is right for you. I will never stop trying to do what is right for you. And while we can't undo the last 9 years, we can make the next 9 years better. It's going to be a long road, but these bills are a sensible and much-needed step in the right direction. I say today to all those members of the opposition and the Greens, don't get in the way of the people of the South Coast getting the affordable homes they deserve. Do the right thing and support these bills, because our community cannot afford to wait any longer because of your political games. I commend the bills to the House.